The Ignorance Bliss record, I think as a kind of general overview, was very much a reaction to the Little Angels splitting up. It's hard to underestimate the power of that feeling at the time. It was, it kind of came out of nowhere in lots of ways and was highly unexpected, even though there'd been, fractures appearing in the situation that we had. But really, I didn't anticipate the band splitting up. So when it did, it was a shock. I found it very confusing, and inevitably there was a lot of anger on my part, and trying to fathom out the reasons why was quite difficult, especially at that particular time in my life. I was still in that bubble of being in the band and being in the music business that was controlled and maintained by a very small group of people. And so by and large, when I look back on it now, it feels like I was out of control of the situation. And so trying to find recovery from that and trying to find a reason to carry on was hard. And as ever with my life, I've always thrown myself into the music to try and sort of figure it out. And so these songs were the reaction to that situation. And inevitably they were, without me really knowing it a lot of the time, quite dark and quite searching, really, of my own psyche. When I look at it now, it's a lot more about myself projecting that feeling onto the record, rather than sort of attacking anybody, really. I think I'm probably attacking myself in lots of ways. Because that's the thing about songwriting or authoring anything artistic, is that at its most pure and its most authentic, it comes out as a voice from way in your psychology, way into your psyche. It appears often as one thing, but really means something else. It's hard to describe it, but that's kind of what it is. And what I've found over the years that I do is I just go with that feeling and I don't question it, and I just write the material, record the material, and it's only in the after effects of it that you begin to kind of realize what it's about. Now, that's not the same for every writer, but that is certainly what happens with me. So with Ignorance, I think this is the most direct, most honest, purest recording I've ever done in my life, actually. It took a lot of doing, and it was homemade. It was made in a studio. I started off recording the album in the Bonaparte Rooms, which is Pete Thomas's studio in Richmond. And Pete was the drummer who actually played on the Jam album as well. He was the drummer on the Jam album, but me and Pete became really, really good friends. And I asked Pete to get involved in my solo record, and he very kindly accepted. And so we recorded the drum parts and did all the arrangements for the songs in his basement studio in Richmond. So then I took those files away and brought them back to where I was living, and I lived in a little area just outside of a little village called Putnam, which is just off the Hog's Back, which is near Guildford in Surrey. And I lived in a cottage, and across the back of the cottage, it was on a piece of private land, actually on the land of a large sort of big grand house, which was privately owned, but there were cottages and all the little other buildings that presumably were part of that house's estate had been turned into homes. We rented a cottage on that land, and at the back of the cottage there was an oast house, which is traditional sort of Surrey place where they used to dry oats, and it was derelict pretty much. But the lady who owned it was a guy called Maggie, and she was really, really sweet and very kind. And I asked her if I could set up my studio in the upper parts of the oast house, which she very kindly allowed me to do. So I set up a makeshift studio up there with gear that I bought with Sony money. I'd been to see Blair MacDonald, who was my publisher at the time, and Blair very kindly well, we were talking, and he said, well, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I want to make an album. And he said, well, how are you going to do it? I said, I don't know. And he said, well, how about I give you some money and you buy some equipment, and you can make it on your own, in your own time, under no pressure. So that's what we did. So I bought some very basic equipment. I bought an ADAT, which was an old digital recording device, for those who know about that sort of thing. A Neve stereo mic pre-strip, a couple of mics and a compressor, and a very, very old-fashioned big-scale mixing desk, and some speakers. And so I used all of that stuff to essentially record all the parts, largely myself. It was the first thing I ever produced, and it was like throwing myself in the deep end, really. Learnt on the job and then self-engineered it all. So yeah, I called the studio Maggie's Farm, and we were in there from the very early spring, I suppose it was late winter, early spring of 1995, right through to the summer. And I finished the recording and then had some contact with Brian Adams. I was still in contact with Brian, and Brian very kindly said I could loan, literally for free, the use of his studio in Vancouver, British Columbia, in Canada. So I went over there with the engineer Stephen Harris, and we mixed the album with another studio engineer, a guy called Mike Plotnikoff, who I'm still very good friends with. And we released the album in 1995, I think later on in the year. I forget exactly when it was. It might have been October, and I went out and toured. So yeah, that's the potted history of it. Very proud of this record. I'm really very pleased that we can be re-releasing it and remastering it. And I hope it gets another opportunity for people to hear it. Yeah, so look out for it, and I'm going to be doing some breakdowns of the songs, what they mean, to accompany this video. Thanks a lot.